Week 4 of the workshop. Very glad, very happy. So, before we go on today, we are going to be tackling the vocal recording. Right, for the first session, what we're going to kick off, right, is we're going to go into stereo recording. Some of it, I actually talked a little bit about it earlier on during the first week when we did drums. Right, but today I'm just going to highlight and go slightly into a little bit more detail into some of the stereo recording techniques. Last week when we talked about guitar, what we did was we did double tracking. Double tracking, when you double track, like you record one guitar part, right, and then you pan to the left, and you record guitar part and you pan to the right. It's actually not considered actual stereo, because actual stereo, the definition of actual stereo, right, you really need to have stereophonic capture of that sound. What that is, when you double track the two guitars, the technical term actually is called wide mono. Yes, all right. I'm not sure really who defined it, because what it actually is, you are capturing a mono source, one guitar, you're panning it hard left, then you are capturing then another double track, then you're panning it to the right. So that's actually considered wide mono. That's technically not a stereo recording, right? It's still a mono recording, but in the mix, you place it in the stereo field, left and right. So, in the end result, right, you get a wider stereo image. But technically, stereo recording, you need to capture both a left and a right signal. So this little picture here, you can sort of see, right? It's a string quartet. You have a pair of microphones in the middle, right? So those are in a stereo array. And what sort of stereo array it is, we'll take a look into detail. All right, so let's move on. Stereo recording. Quick introduction, right? And short history, okay? There's always some history behind whatever method, whatever techniques, okay? Full name, we call it stereophonic sound, okay? So it refers generally to any system, okay, of recording or sound transmission or playback, right? For example, using multiple microphones and loudspeakers. Stereophonic does refer to two loudspeakers, but sometimes it can evolve more than that. Sometimes you have a 2.1, for example. Right, you have your low frequency emitter, your subwoofer. Exactly, right? So stereo need not be limited to two channels, not necessarily limited to your left and right channel. Right? When you talk about motion picture surround sound systems, right, in movie theaters and all that, have included upward of 6 channels or more, okay? Previously, obviously, right, Dolby surround sound was 5.1. You have your 5, then your 0.1 so you need 6 channels of audio. Then moving up, you have your SDDS and all that. That's moving up to 7.1 onwards. And now, of course, you have Atmos, right? The most recent one, the latest one is Atmos. Here's the difference, okay? You need to make a distinction because very popular nowadays, right? You also hear the word binaural. You also hear that. So even though stereo and binaural kind of involves 2 channels, you also involve recording both a left and a right. But binaural capture is very specific. Binaural sound uses 2 microphones located at the ear position in an artificial head. It's very important. You need to involve that artificial head, the dummy head. Again, I'll go into detail later. You will see in the slides. Okay, so it's very important. Okay, and binaural sound can only be reproduced accurately over headphones. On speakers, doesn't sound right when you capture something binaural, right? It's not the same, right? It only works with headphones. Let's go into stereo recording techniques first, right? What we will probably be using most of the time. So it can be divided into 3 types, right? Generally, it's divided into 3 types of stereo recording. Now, number 1 is called coincident. Number 2 is near coincident. And number 3, what we call spaced pair microphone arrays. So 3 types of arrays: coincident arrays, near coincident arrays, and spaced pair. Right, as you can see by the name coincident, right? Coincidence. Coincident here means that the capsule of your microphone is going to be placed right in the same physical space, physical location. Now, technically, it's impossible to be in the same physical location because when you put two microphones or so, they are two things cannot occupy the same physical space. They are, maybe a few millimeters, 10 or 20 millimeters apart, depending on the size, right? But we consider it coincident, okay? Near coincident is a little bit different. It's spaced slightly further apart. Then space pair, obviously, right, they are spaced much further apart. Okay, now let's go into the actual techniques itself, all right? First one, this is a type of a coincident microphone array. And the first one here, can anyone guess it? What is it called? You look by the diagram. No answer? It's called XY stereo, okay? So reason why it's called XY stereo is because you have one microphone which is on the x-axis, another one which is on your y-axis. XY stereo, very specifically, this uses a pair of cardioid microphones, okay? Cardioid mics. So this is very important, yeah? So it's not omni, it's not figure of 8, this is cardioid at 90 degrees with the capsules aligned to the front. So these are two microphones, as you can see. The left channel in blue, all right, is capturing on the left, and you have the right channel on the right, and they are both 90 degrees, okay? Aligned at 90-degree angle. Now, XY stereo, it's ideal for close mic applications. So you can get close to a source with it. Characteristics of an XY stereo, has a very stable stereo image, all right, with minimal phase issues. So remember when I talked about last week we were recording guitars with two microphones. When you have microphones that are close to each other, for me, you get a much more stable image that way because the microphones are much closer to each other. You have minimal phase issues. When you have them a little bit apart, you start introducing a little bit of phase issues. But then again, it's down to preference, okay? And because of that, the XY has a very, very stable stereo image. What do I mean by stable? It means that when you record a sound and then when you listen back to playback, a stable stereo image means that when you hear that sound source, either it is to the center or if it's slightly to the left or slightly to the right, you can locate and hear the sound. So if it's center, you can really, really hear it's center, right? When you say something that's an unstable stereo image, it means that it's a bit undefined. When it's an unstable stereo image, the sound, instead of being like straight up in the middle, it sounds like it's a bit spread out, all right? So again, there's pros and cons to it. There's not to say that one is better or one is not. Depends on what you're getting. If you want something to sound a little bit spread out, then, that's where we use maybe a space pair, right? And not an XY. But if you want something that has a lot more solid mono, a little bit more solid stereo image down in the center, then an XY is probably the most suitable. Again, it always depends on what you want to capture, how you want to capture it. Now, with the XY, starting point is 90 degrees, but you can always increase, right, the angle beyond 90 degrees. And logically, if you increase it, what happens? You get a wider stereo image. You generally can probably go all the way up to about 130 degrees or so. Beyond that, you are turning it into a figure of 8 already, okay? Because beyond that, you are kind of capturing only the sides. You lose the center already. Okay, because bear in mind, this is a cardioid. Spread too far apart, then your center image, you cannot pick up properly already. You start to pick up only the sides already. All right, so the next coincident stereo array, which I'm going to talk about, right, involves this. It is called the Blum Line or Blum Lane. Okay, I'm not really sure how to pronounce his name. So this technique is named after Alan Blum Line, okay? He's an engineer, right? If I'm not mistaken, UK, I think he's British, all right? And he was the one who devised and came up. He did a lot of the studies and research into stereophonic sound, into stereophonic recording. So this technique is named after him. So The difference between the Blum Line technique and the XY technique is the type of polar pattern that's being used. So Alan Blum Line, the Blum Line technique uses a pair of figure 8 mics 90 degrees with each other. You get a much greater stereo separation compared to XY. You still get a very natural, you still get a very natural and stable stereo image, but you also get a lot more of room ambience. So, it's a lot more roomy because obviously, right, a figure of 8, you're not only capturing the source from the front, but you're also capturing your reflections, you're capturing your room ambience as well. But it does require careful positioning, all right, to ensure that the direct to reverberant, right, the direct to your reverb, the direct to ambience relationship does not suffer. So because this picks up your room ambience as well, you have to make sure, mainly due to distance, right? You have to place it, you have to listen to it and check and make sure that, okay, you're getting enough of the direct sound and enough of the ambient sound. Because once you capture it this way with a Blum line, with this technique, the amount of your ambience or amount of reverb that I capture, right, you can't change it really. Because once you capture it, right, you can't really do anything about it. So, okay, you have to be very careful when you position this. So, number 3, the third one. Okay, this is very cool. As you can look at the polar pattern. Here, it still involves 2 microphones, but one, as you can see, what is the red one? The one which is labeled M. What polar pattern is that? Cardioid. Okay, right. And how about the S? There's an S positive and an S negative. That's a... Oh, no. This is actually one microphone. Figure of 8. Yes, correct. So, anybody knows what this technique is called? Mid-side. Okay, good. That's the right answer. This is called the mid-side technique, or we call it MS, right, for short. So how do we use an MS recording? This is actually, it's a very powerful technique, actually, using MS recording, okay? It uses, firstly, there's a figure of 8 microphone. In this case, right, this microphone, the AKG C414, in this middle here. As you can see, it's facing sideways. So this faces the sides with the null point, okay, the null point, the dead side of the figure of 8, pointing towards the source. So this is capturing the sides, okay? You combine with it a cardioid pattern that faces the source. It's 2 microphones, right? One cardioid that's pointed towards the source and a figure of 8 that's pointing towards the sides. MS is completely phase coherent and mono-compatible. And the reason is because if you want something that is fully mono, if you want it to be really solid mono information, what you do is you just take the mono signal. You want to add a little bit more stereo information, right? You just balance and you blend in the amount of your sides. What it involves here, it needs, number one, either it needs an MS decoder or you need to do some kind of a manual setup. Because what it involves here is that, number one, the cardioid gives you your mid channel, but your sides, because it's coming out only on one microphone, you get only one input. So what you need is you need to duplicate that input and you phase invert. You phase reverse the second one. You duplicate the sides, so you phase invert. That's where you get your S positive and your S negative. So one is positive, the other one is phase inverted. So actually when you end up, all right, the number of channels that you have with a mid-side technique, you actually end up with 3. You have your M, you have your S, your side positive, and you have your S negative. So if you want it to be fully mono, you just use only the mid channel. But if you want it to be a little bit more stereo, you just blend in the 2 S channels. As you blend it in, you hear the stereo goes wider. That's why it's a very powerful technique, because it's phase coherent and mono-compatible. Why the word mono-compatible? It's got to relate with earlier what I mentioned about stable stereo image. Mono-compatibility in this day and age is still important. And the reason why, because sometimes when you have too wide of a stereo image, what happens when something is summed and it's collapsed down to mono, you get phase cancellation. They cancel each other when it's being summed to mono. So for example, on a handphone, smartphone, or some mobile devices, right, which is only mono, right? The speakers are only mono. When it's collapsed to that, when you have something that's on your left and right in your stereo, what happens is the level drops. So it sounds softer, or sometimes it gets cancelled altogether. Then when you listen in mono, it's like, why the guitars or maybe this part or something like that sounds so soft on that? That is the result of phase cancellation and mono compatibility. That is also one of the reasons why the method which I explained to you, where you duplicate the channel, you pan it left and right, and then you can do some trickery to it. Like you can put some delay, you can put some modulation on one side. So on the speakers, the effect will sound fine for you, but the problem is mono compatibility. Sometimes on broadcast, sometimes on radio, and on some mono devices, if you use that technique, the sound will just disappear. It will just collapse, right? So that's why there's a weakness, and you're highly discouraged from using that trick, using that technique. Yes, you can. It can sound nice. You can get a nice stereo image when you listen to the speakers in your place. You see, when you listen to it, it sounds fine, but elsewhere it might not translate properly, right? So that's where it's important, and that's why MS is very powerful as well, because it can be fully mono compatible. Let's move on. We clear on this? So these are your coincident microphone arrays, right? So coincident microphone arrays, the microphone capsules are always next to each other, as close as possible, right? They are coincident with each other. Okay, now we're going to go into, I'm going to jump first into the third one, okay? Because this is something most common. The spaced pair microphone array, okay? So I got a little diagram there of a drum set. Now, so space pair here, the most common one that we use is called the AB, right? The AB stereo. So when I was recording drums, this is kind of what I was using, an AB stereo pair. So what are the characteristics and what are the benefits of an AB stereo? What it uses a pair of cardioid or omni mics that cover the area that you want to capture, or whatever sound that you want to capture, okay? It can be cardioid, it can be omni. Obviously, if you use an omni, it's going to capture a lot more of the room, a lot more of the surrounding. But if you use the cardioid is going to be a little bit more focused towards the sound source. So you can experiment, whichever you want. So sometimes you can use a third microphone, maybe a center mic, right? If you want it to be a little bit more solid, sometimes you can use that, an additional mic in the center. AB stereo gives you a wide, exaggerated stereo image, okay? So if you want something that's really nice and wide, wow, okay, then go for an AB, right? If you want something that's a little bit more solid, more stable, you use an XY. But, right, with the wider exaggerated stereo image, it increases the likelihood of phase issues. Like, as I mentioned earlier, there is going to be a greater chance that you might run into phase issues. So you have to be very, very aware of that. So how do you sort of minimize the problem? So this is something that we call, all right, the 3-to-1 rule. I wouldn't actually use the word rule. I say maybe a guide. It's, when we say rule of thumb, it means that, it's something to help you to guide. You can use that as a guide. Once you know it, you can always bend the rules a little bit, okay? So use the 3-to-1 rule. So if you're not sure, if you want to minimize your phase problems, you use the 3-to-1 rule. 3-to-1 rule here means the ratio, okay, of the space, the distance between the two mics, your stereo mics, is going to be 3 times the ratio, the distance between the mics to the sound source. So this means, for example, if the mics are like 1 meter away from the sound source, so if I'm doing a stereo mic of the drums, if it's 1 meter away, they should be 3 meters apart. Okay, so that's the 3-to-1 rule, and then you can always expand So if it's 2 meters away, then it should be 3 times 3, 6 meters apart right? So 3-to-1 ratio. But to be honest, I usually don't really care about it. I don't go crazy and insane and measure exactly 3-to-1. Because like you said, be aware of the rule, right? Be aware of the guidelines. But once you know it, right, know how to listen for the problems, you can always bend the rules a little bit. So listen back. Once you record something, you put using an A/B pair. Listen to it, see if there's any issues, then you adjust accordingly lah. If it sounds too out of phase, your stereo image is a bit too weird or something like that, adjust the microphones. Maybe you need to bring them a little bit closer to the source. Maybe it doesn't have to be so wide. You want to bring it a little bit nearer. Okay, let's move on. Second one. Okay, this one looks interesting. This is, if I'm not mistaken, this is actually Abbey Road, okay? So, this technique is called the Deca Tree. Deca here, it refers to the record label, right? Deca Records, right? So, Deca Records is the classical music label, the arm, right? Under EMI, EMI Records. Hence, that's why you can see, right? The instance of this orchestral recording. So, it's developed by Deca Records in the 1950s. Okay, so this is actually the most popular method of recording for orchestral and or symphonic music, or even with large ensembles, right? Maybe with even you can even use it for choirs or big groups. Next time, if you ever see an orchestral recording, or you see, maybe those in movies, they have all those bonus footage of all this film scoring and all that. Try and pay attention. Look at the try and spot where the Deca Tree array is. So you can't really see it here. It's actually here. You can see this big, you can see this large mic stand, right? This giant mic stand up here. So the Deca Tree is usually placed above the conductor. So what's the Deca Tree? So it uses an arrangement of 3 omni microphones, right? And this is important. It's omni. It has to be omni, not cardioid, not figure 8. So this is suspended roughly 10 feet. That's about 3 meters, okay? Above the conductor's head. So it's up there. So the array, right, is generally arranged this way. So the bottom 2 that's on the same line, those are 2 meters apart. And then there's one which is 1.5 meters, a little bit further forward. The one that makes the center, right, of this configuration. So they call it the Deca Tree because, I guess, because it's like a triangle, it looks like a tree lah. And then they position the mic stand above there. So it's like on a T-shaped bar, then you position it. Of course, if you want to do it, if you don't have the T-shaped bar, you can always improvise. You have to put the three mic stands and then arrange it that way lah. What this gives you, the Deca Tree, is it's very natural. And it's highly musical sound recording. Somehow they figured out and they devised this technique, right? So it sounds very, very natural. It sounds very, very open and highly musical. So this is something that you can always experiment lah if you ever want to capture something. But you need 3 microphones lah, okay? And they need to be omni. So this can also be used for drums and, as I mentioned earlier, choirs, ensembles and all that. You can always use that as well. Moving on, we are going to go to, the second type, okay? Because I jumped from 1 to 3. Now, the second type, you can guess it, it's going to be your near coincident arrays. So why is it called near coincident? Because now the microphone capsules are not in contact. They are not physically next to each other. They are occupying slightly spaced apart. The first near coincident array, this is called ORTF, right? So ORTF stands for, pardon my French, Office de Radiodiffusion Télévision Français, okay? Or whatever lah, okay? Or how you pronounce it in French. So ORTF is like our RTM lah, okay? Right, so this was developed by the French. So what this uses, it uses a pair of cardioid microphones with their diaphragms, okay? So the diaphragm capsule, right, is 17 cm apart. And very specific, it's at a 110-degree angle. Right, so it's a very, very specific set of specifications. Can anyone guess why is it 17 cm? Why did they come up with the figure 17 centimeters? Anyone? Even from the crew also. Anyone knows why is it 17 cm? Try and guess. 17 cm is roughly this. because we all know we have a 15 cm when you're ruler, right? It's usually 15 cm, so it's a little bit longer than that. Can anyone guess why 17 cms? Why is that number so magical? Why not 10 cm? Why not 30 cm? 30 cm is easier, right? It's 30 cm will be about 1 foot. Come on, man. Yes. It's got to do with biology. That is the width of the average human head, 17 centimeters. All right. Okay, I don't know lah. Anybody got a tape measure? Let's go and measure our heads now and see lah. Okay, right. So that's why it's 17 cm apart. So this is a modification of the traditional XY stereo technique. So the reason why they invented this, it mimics the way the human ears hear. That's why 17 cm. And this results in a wider stereo image. So it's wider than your XY. When I record, let's say string ensembles, right? Whenever I record like string section, I like to use ORTF. I experimented before using XY and all that. My favorite is ORTF lah, right? But you have to remember the specifications, 17 cm apart, 110 degrees angle. You have 3 options already. If you want something that's very solid, very solid, you get a very solid, narrower, more stable center image, go for XY or MS. You want something wide, you want something that sounds very, very wide, go for a space pair or Deca Tree if you can afford, if you have 3 Omni microphones lah, okay? But if you want something in between, medium width, you have your ORTF technique, right? So it always depends on what kind of capture you want to get, you see. So you have your, as usual, your small, your large, you have your medium, okay? This is your menu of different styles that you can use. Okay, now let's move on. Early on I mentioned binaural, and you can see this is binaural stereo. So binaural stereo, again, it's a very, very specific technique. So what this uses, it uses a pair of Omni condenser microphones, right? So it's Omni condensers, and it's very important. It needs to be placed inside the model of a human head in the openings of the ears. So this one is actually, it's an actual microphone developed by Neumann. So this is actually a Neumann microphone that you can actually buy. And it's just not a microphone. It is literally the entire head itself, right? The dummy head. There is a very, very, very good reason. So the characteristics of a binaural stereo is that you get very immersive 3D stereo effect when you listen to headphones, okay? It doesn't translate well when you listen to loudspeakers, right? It only translates to headphones. So this has been now further developed by Sennheiser, okay? Actually, Sennheiser is the parent company, right, for Neumann lah. Right, now they have your Ambisonics B, right? These are some of the newer formats that you can nowadays play with and mix into these kind of formats, right? And the Ambio plugins. You can actually kind of play around now if you have these plugins, right? So even though on your DAW, you can mix it down to an ambient, to a binaural format, Ambisonics format, even though you did not record it with a binaural head, you see. Why is the head important? Why is it important? Why don't just use two pair of Omni mics, just like a stereo technique? Why must you put the head there? Huh? Yes, it's actually there for separation. They have already done the research. They've already done the analysis. If you kind of just use a pair, it doesn't replicate exactly how our ears sound. It's not as accurate. Because bear in mind, when our ears are listening, whatever the sound that's traveling from the right, all right, it arrives directly at our right ear. Okay, but our left ear also picks up the sound, as I mentioned earlier, right? Stereo, in the previous weeks when you guys asked about stereo, I talked about your intraoral time differences and your intraoral level differences, these two things. So not only does the time difference and level difference, there's actually one more thing as well. The frequency is also different. Here, obviously, if the sound is arriving from the right-hand side, you hear a lot more of the high frequencies. Your left ear, the high frequencies are going to be a little bit attenuated. You have less of high frequencies. So having the head right accurately models how the binaural microphones pick up the sound. So that's why it's important. Actually, nowadays you can buy the binaural microphone rigs which you wear on your head, right? And it's really really cool, right? I've actually seen one. I actually know of some students who do that for their projects, and you do binaural recordings that way. It's just like any other headphone. You just wear it, okay? You sometimes will have the dead cat, the dead cat, a windscreen, even on that. So then you walk around and then you record and you capture. Then when you play it back, right, it's really cool. It really sounds like you're there. You can even check it out on YouTube or any of that. There's a lot of these binaural recordings that are out there. So it's done and captured using binaural. It's very, very immersive. So it's especially when you talk about virtual reality, augmented reality. These are the kind of thing, immersive audio. These are the things that we should get into in the future, right? Definitely something we want to explore a little bit more, because especially for a lot of this content nowadays, I think you can get those. They come in like a set, all right? The cheapest ones, they cost around, it's about 1,006 ringgit. If I'm not mistaken, it's about $400. $300-400. I think you have to order them definitely from overseas lah. I think you do have some binaural. I think even those from Zoom, from like for example here. This is of course not. This is actually an XY, but Zoom also has some of those sets as well, where you can sort of capture 360-degree, right? Audio. Something similar, but it's not exactly the same as binaural. Okay, now I'm gonna skip overhead and go very, very briefly over some techniques, right? Stereo techniques when we're recording any instrument. But in this instance, I'm going to talk and use the example of an acoustic guitar. Right, okay, so here are a couple of scenarios. Scenario number one, let's say we are recording with only one mic, okay? So with one mic, okay, it's very, very straightforward, obviously. You can always experiment either putting it in cardioid, you can take a figure of 8, you use an omni microphone, and right, just pick the best sweet spot for recording, for capturing the acoustic guitar. So with one mic, it's very straightforward. So what about scenario 2? Let's go with 2 microphones. So here, in this case, this is how an XY stereo pattern would look like, okay? Now, obviously, this is for the sake of the picture. It's not pointing at the guitar. It's pointing towards the ceiling. But this is so that you guys can see, right? Obviously, right? When you're actually recording it, you're supposed to be pointing towards the, okay, pointing towards the guitar, right? So this would be an example of an XY stereo. So here, as you can guess, this is a space pair, the AB method, all right? So again, you can sort of see that this is kind of roughly 3-to-1 distance, right? The distance between the 2 mics, and then compared to the distance to the instrument, to the source, the ratio is roughly 3-to-1 lah. Okay, maybe we should take a kind of a measurement and actually measure and see whether it's exactly or not, right? So this is your space pair. Of course, as I mentioned, space pair, you can always experiment. You can always make it a little bit wider if you want. You can maybe put it more towards the bottom, towards the bottom body of the guitar. You can put this a little bit further. Of course, you get a much more wider stereo image lah. If you want it, if you want it that way, okay. Space pair is not just that, not necessarily this as well. You could even put one in front of the guitar, for example, like this one. But maybe you want to put the second one coming from the top. You could also do that. That's actually also a form of space pair. Then you can pan one left and right and see how the result sounds like lah. Sometimes, right, some forms of capture for acoustic guitar and instrument, maybe you want to capture it like how the guitarist hears it, right? Like how you as a player, you hear it, then you put a microphone above the shoulder, coming from behind. Maybe that's one method you want to do lah. Now, another way that you can get a stereo capture from an acoustic guitar is here. you could use one microphone, and then if your guitar has got a pickup, right, record it with the pickup. So what you get is you have the mic signal and you have your direct signal right from the pickup. Then with these two, you can spread it left and right. So that's one method, and it's another technique that you can do so. But bear in mind, this is, again, it's not really technically a stereo. It's again what I described earlier. It's more of a wide mono signal. One is a mic and one is direct from a pickup, you see. But it can be handy. So if your guitar has, right, if you're recording an acoustic guitar that has a pickup output like that, you can always try it that way. And when it comes to acoustic guitar, all right, I highly recommend, right, that you pick and record using a microphone lah. Don't be lazy and take the easy way. If you have got a pickup, you just record direct. The irony is, it'll always sound so much better if you record with a real mic lah, right? But if you have an option, record both. Now, what if you encounter a situation where the guitar player is singing and playing guitar at the same time? This is where it gets interesting. Let's take a look first of all at the microphone which is at the top one. So this actually looks like a AKG C414 as well, which has a figure of 8 option pattern. So this one is the first one you can see. It's pointing towards the mouth, right? So it's capturing the singing. So if this is a figure of 8, where is the null? Where is the dead side pointed to? Can you see where is it? Where is the dead side? Aim towards that. Is aimed towards the guitar. So you have to be very, very careful and very, very clever in how you position it. So you point the capsule towards the voice. Okay, you have to see what their position and playing is like lah. And then the null we're pointing towards the guitar. Then you take your second microphone and you use the same technique. So your second microphone is in front here. So it's pointed towards the guitar. Generally, it should maybe be pointed slightly downwards lah, okay? So that your null of the second mic is pointing towards the singer. All right? This technique, right, figure of 8's, the null, the dead zone, all right, the dead spot, right, the blind spot or whatever you want to call it, is very, 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 very strong. You get a very, very strong null out of it. So you'll be very surprised if you use a figure of 8 this way in this technique. I've tried it before, right? You almost cannot hear the mic that the figure of 8 that's picking up the voice, right? You can barely hear the guitar if you position it very, very carefully. So you get very good separation this way. Now, bear in mind, this is figure of 8, so it's not only pointing forwards, right, towards the source, but it's also capturing your ambience at the back as well. So generally, right, figure of 8 is going to be a little bit more roomy lah sound. So if your room is too ambient, it might not work lah, because in the end you get up picking too much reflection also. So, but this is an approach which you can definitely use lah. Okay, if you want to try to capture singer who plays the guitar at the same time. Great. Any questions on this? Okay, if not, right. So this would be the end about stereo recording. Okay. Just a quick recap. You have your coincident arrays, you have your near coincident, and you have your space pair. So these three give you all different options. Whether you want something that's very mono compatible, that gives you a much more stable stereo image, or you want something a little bit more wider, a wide, exaggerated, big sounding stereo image, or you want something in between, right? There's so many methods and many techniques that are available, that are out there. Okay, so we're going to move on to our next topic real soon. Okay, we'll take a little short break and we'll get into it.